Okay, the Philadelphia 76ers, they won game 3. And, they probably should have got one at home, but if they lose the next two, which is something that I'm thinking might happen, what will that mean for James Harden's legacy? So, okay, Jimmy Butler, right? He started this series saying exactly what he was going to do. That he was going to roll through Philadelphia, Embiid, no Embiid. It didn't matter, right? And, right now, they're looking like they're doing a pretty great job of that. So, Heat are still up in this series. They look like the better team to me. Their point differential says this. Look at this. Their point differential says this. That's not everything, but what will it say about James Harden if they lose? If he comes to Philadelphia and they lose again? Okay, firstly, okay, we know about James Harden. Unguardable. He was a really unguardable player, and that's a phrase. That's a phrase thrown around a lot these days. James Harden. If I could pluck a player out of a time vortex, a 2018 James Harden, which wasn't that long ago, was by the definition unguardable. Like unguardable. I mean, meaning if he played a team full of the all defensive first team, if he versed the entire all defensive first team and was double teamed and triple teamed and locked in the corner, he would still get his buckets. He would still get his points, right? He'd still be making his money. That's how good James Harden was in his apex. Okay, the short list of unguardable plays, the short list. I'm saying unguardable. I won't include centers here because look, centers have been unguardable. Shaq was just physically unguardable. I'm talking about guys that who could beat you on every single spot on the court. I mean, Kareem was the most unstoppable 2 points in NBA history. No one's declining that. But if he's staying at the perimeter, I mean, other than his playmaking abilities, he's useless. He's not a threat. Okay, so unguardable plays. Okay, the short list: Bernard King, George Gervin, Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, Kevin Durant, and obviously James Harden. And that's it. That's the short list of unguardable players. When people talk, when people talk about the greatest NBA teams in NBA history, which it is the 17 Warriors, it just is. When you try to you try your absolute best to poke holes in that theory, one thing you can say is that the following year, right, the following year in 2018, a year where they should have even been better because they were playing with each other more, a year where the internal squabbles they hadn't started yet, they hadn't started. That was for next year. A team full of young superstars in their prime. Kevin Durant and Steph Curry were superstars. Klay Thompson, Draymond Green, they were all stars. They also had a deep bench as well. So, I mean, Iggy was really good. Look, so a team full of 4 All-Stars, this is where I'm going with this, full of 4 All-Stars on one team, how come if they were so great, they went 7 games with James Harden and an underutilized Chris Paul? One All-Star on a Rocket squad. Because, it speaks to how great James Harden is. He was at his peak, okay? So, I mean, like, how come, like, a team like the 96 Bulls, right? They didn't go 7 games that year or the following year, um, against anybody. And I mean, this is a very flawed argument. I'm not, like, I don't say this is it's a very flawed argument. There were so many external factors. The 86 Celtics, the 87 Lakers, they were both in numerous 7 game series the following year. Obviously, they were all getting a bit old and injured and warmed up. But like, what I'm saying is, and they were against 7 game series against teams that really good, didn't really have any business sticking around that long. So, but they were also part of very individual. They were ending their primes. Like that was a closing of their primes. The 01 Lakers, another team, great Lakers team. They're in the conversation for greatest teams ever in NBA history. With Kobe, with a rising Kobe Bryant and a rising Kobe Bryant faster than a Shaquille O'Neal was falling. That was the dynamic. But they went 7 games with Sacramento the next year, so it happens. But obviously they had internal struggles. So, like, again, it's a really bad argument. It's a really bad argument. But how come a team that can be so great and the following year with stars that haven't visually aged, right? Who with a team that shows no signs of disarray quite yet. Even the players at that time will say it hadn't started yet. Against facing a team with tougher competition, how is it that the greatest team in NBA history nearly lost to James Harden and one All Star? One All Star. I love Chris Paul. I love Chris Paul. The truth is, at that stage of his career, in that system, he was just a solid All Star. Not as valuable as he is today. Okay, we know the story. James Harden with one All Star, because James Harden wants the system. They go up 3-2 against a Kevin Durant, Stephen Curry, Klay Thompson, Draymond Green Warrior squad. The unbeatable Warrior squad. Championship proven Warrior squad. CP3, the theme of his career, he gets injured, bad time, injured in game 5, and without any other All Star, without no help, right? Remember, Jordan never won without All Stars, with no help. Harden loses the next 2 games and obviously the series, and today he is without a ring. That's a fact. So, how many players could really do that? Bernard King did something similar in '84, taking the Celtics to 7 games. Dominic Wilkins took the Celtics 7 games in '88, I believe. So, like, really great scorers have done this before. So, what I'm saying with James Harden, he was as great offensively as any player ever, or at least right up there with any player that had ever played the game of basketball ever. Okay, defense, that was another conversation. But so whether he wins a ring or not, we know that. So, you know, which is looking, less and less likely, by the way, as his game is obviously deteriorating before our very eyes. He will be one of the greatest players to never win a championship. Okay, we know that. But to me, I base a lot of your legacy on what's your best moments. Like you're watching a TV show. Let me see the best few seasons. I don't want to watch the start and the end. What was your best 8 to 9 year stretch? Right. That's why I don't really hold the Oklahoma City results against him too much. I don't think anyone should. Even though he was actually terrific. He was terrific in Oklahoma. Especially in some of those, especially that welcoming party in 2012 against it was the San Antonio Spurs series. That was, oh my god, like that's where we all realized like this guy's like Manu Ginobili, but like better with like a more creative shot. I mean, look, so like looking through the scope of his prime, like he's stretched out prime. It is a lot of ugly moments, especially in the playoffs. It's a lot of collections of supporting cast and talent that failed a lot of supporting cast. It's a lot of shattered expectations. So I'm going to be real about this, but I'm also going to be real, we're going to be critical of the guy. A lot that exists, okay? That exists within the framework of Harden's career. Okay, we know this. But we also need to point out the fact that I think this is what uh, goes over people's heads a bit. Harden played a lot of minutes. A lot of minutes. From 2013 to 2019. Look at this, man. Look at this. That's over 20,000 minutes. And that's just in the regular season. That, by the way, that's more games and minutes than Kawhi Leonard has played throughout his entire career. So we're talking about the regular season here. Throughout his entire career. That's a stretch of Harden. Okay? We're talking about regular season. But look, and when you match that, let's look at this. When you match that, obviously with, you know, that 7 year stretch with other guys who maybe fit the mold of Harden, who, out of these world athletes, sensational athletes, but by all accounts, they didn't really prioritize his sleep much. I mean, there's stories of Wilt Chamberlain, you know, partying in his Harlem nightclub that he had in Harlem, and then traveling to Philadelphia and still putting up 40 and 20. So, like, let's be real. What are you going to say to the guy? Hey, you can't be traveling from Harlem while you're dominating your regular season. Obviously, it caught up to him at the end. And he was a great athlete. The truth is, he could have kept playing, but he wasn't the same guy at the end. Allen Iverson, he would play 40 minutes, 40 grueling basketball minutes, like grueling. Small guy running to big guys on 2 hours sleep. Heaps of stories like that. I mean, guys who carried a particular lifestyle. Big party guys. And, they got away with it because they were just these physical freaks of nature. So I understand that. But obviously, eventually it caught up with them. And there's even like small examples of this, like not as significant. Like Ty Lawson was one. J.R. Smith, I think, was another. We can say um, Larry Sanders, Chris Anderson. Remember the Birdman? Remember the Birdman? What happened to him? Exactly. Guys that loved a particular lifestyle, and their games, when they started declining, it declined fast. That was the reality. So I don't want to be like the NBA's Cliff Theory guy. I don't want to be like a Cliff Theory dude, because that was also about age and just predictions of future results. This was about the precautions a player took to keep his body intact, right? I mean, there's old stories of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. One of the things that made him so aloof and weird, one of the 1,000 things that made him so distant, was that he was really into stretching and really into yoga, and everyone was like, ugh, weird guy, whatever. Guess what? He was dominant for over 2 decades of basketball. 2 decades of basketball. Before anyone knew what yoga was, before obviously people were stretching, but like the yoga thing was really weird at the time. There's lots of accounts of that. 2 decades he was dominant for. Okay, so to answer the question, I think Harden's going to have many great games. I think Philly are going to lose this series, um, partly because I don't think Embiid's quite there yet. I don't think he has enough time to get there yet. If you put a gun to my head and you ask me, will James Harden retire as a champion? I'm going to say no. And if so, he will be remembered as an amazing, transformative player who could never get past the line. That's just the reality. Who maybe I could say who got in his own way a little bit, whether it was playoff chokes, whether it was just poor choices of how to maintain his body in the second half of his career. Bad free agent decisions. I mean, like the West, lot of bad decisions because James Harden, he always got his own way. He ran the show. It was always his choice. What would happen to him, no matter what. Like that's the thing about Harden. Everything was on him. And I really hope it doesn't get as forgotten as someone like George Gervin, a guy who was phenomenal, but he matched up against the Showtime Lakers, this all-time great team in the conference finals, and he couldn't get past the line. And great guy, always cared about scoring maybe a little bit too much. Creative scorer. But I think the lack of team accomplishments washed out his legacy as the generations continue to evolve. I think that's the case with Gervin. I love Gervin. The casual fan does not know two things about the Iceman. That's just the truth about it. And I really hope when we're talking 40 years from now, people aren't saying the same thing about James Harden. Creative scorer, maybe like the free throws a bit too much, and he couldn't get past his team. Lack of team accomplishments. Played with a lot of great players, couldn't get it done, and that was the case with Harden. All right, like and subscribe right now. We're uploading videos every single few days. Like and subscribe.